Welcome to the Smart Dating Academy podcast. I'm Bela, the founder of Smart Dating Academy and your host. I started Smart Dating Academy in 2009 because I had this crazy knack of giving people dating advice that actually worked, that I took. I've been married for almost 25 years, and now my company helps people to date smarter and to find love. This podcast is meant to bring more love into your life, no matter where you are and what you do. And we're here to bring more life into your love. Welcome back. And I am so excited about this topic, this episode, and most importantly, this guest. Now, if you've been following the podcast, some episodes ago, I can't remember if it was episode 2 or 3 or whatever it was, I talked about, are you dating a narcissist or is this person just an a-hole? And went through lots of the info about what is actually a diagnosable narcissist. So many people, maybe even including you, came back to me saying you loved this episode and you're thirsty for more. And it's like, this is a word that's pervading our culture. So I wanted to bring on an incredible resource to all of us, as well as a friend of mine. And I welcome Dr. Michelle Roberts to the podcast. And before I bring Michelle officially in, I want to tell you what a badass individual she is. So Michelle Roberts, Dr. Roberts, she's a psychotherapist, a journalist, and a professor. And her work focuses on the intersection of culture, relationships, and modern narcissism. She helps women break trauma cycles that keep them from becoming their whole amazing, radiant selves. So Michelle has spent a lifetime observing the human condition in all its pain and complexity. First, in addition to being an amazing therapist, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Oh my God, who does that? And now as a researcher and psychotherapist specializing in the treatment of narcissistic abuse, she's amazing. She's seen how trauma and betrayal can immobilize even the most capable and insightful women. So Michelle, welcome to the Smart Dating Academy podcast. We cannot wait for the gems that I know you were just going to launch on us.
Thank you, Bella. It's so nice to see you again and to be back here.
It's so awesome. So, Michelle, tell us about just kind of a summary of your background, the research you did, and what C-PTSD is, because your work blew my mind the first time I heard it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I first started my career as a journalist. My gosh, long time ago now, 30 years ago. And I covered crime. So as you can imagine, I saw a lot of dark personalities. And I was always really curious and fascinated about that. And then I also got to kind of observe the collateral damage of that. So kind of the seeds for this interest were planted way back then. When I left journalism about a decade ago, it was just kind of as this kind of boom of narcissism was starting to percolate on social media. There wasn't much happening kind of in the mainstream press or psychological journals at the time, but there was a big group of survivors who couldn't figure out what was happening to them. They were traumatized. They were kind of brought to their knees by these relationships that were driving them crazy, but they really didn't even know why or if they were being abused. And this whole kind of field of narcissistic abuse started to grow and percolate in Facebook groups and on Instagram pages. And this is what started about a decade ago. And I had some personal experience with narcissism in my family of origin and in a relationship that I had, and I was interested in it too. So I just kind of watched and observed as this scene kind of started to take root. And then when I got into my own psychology and counseling studies, I decided to take this on full time.
That's awesome. So, so cool. And tell us about what you discovered about early childhood experiences, the test, so to speak, that blew my mind the first time we talked, and what C, as in Captain, C-PTSD is.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So, of course, the internet abounded in all these opinions about the topic of narcissism, and they weren't always helpful. And there was little published science, and what there was mainly looked at what made a pathologically narcissistic man. My research is the first peer-reviewed, extensive research that focuses on survivors.
Wow.
Women who identify as narcissistic abuse survivors. And what I learned about them was that they scored 4 times higher for the presence of childhood early life trauma than the average population. That's very significant.
I have goosebumps listening to that, like full body chills listening to that.
Yeah. And nearly 3 out of 4 of them then met the clinical criteria, the cutoff scores for what is known as complex PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a form of PTSD that happens when a person gets trapped in a situation. It is diagnosed for prisoners of war, domestic violence victims, child abuse victims. It's when you can't escape the abuse. And it is one of the hardest diagnoses to identify and treat. And what I learned was that 3 out of 4, so almost 75% of the 2,000 women who participated in my study met the diagnostic criteria for C-PTSD, but almost none of them had been diagnosed.
Unbelievable. So they identified as victims of narcissistic abuse, but had no idea, 3 out of 4, that they had experienced diagnosable C-PTSD because of early childhood experiences or relationships.
Well, I'm not sure if they didn't have any idea, but the people that they were depending on to treat them weren't seeing the connection, which is the more important part, right? Complex PTSD is a relatively new diagnosis. It's an important one because we even treat it differently from PTSD. A lot of the treatment protocols that we use are even slightly different for complex PTSD versus regular PTSD. But this group of women were having really serious C-PTSD symptoms, but no one in the clinical community was diagnosing it for what it was.
Wow.
And that's what my research showed. So the clinical implications for this are incredible. And it also showed just how underserved this group of women were. Another step that I took, because I really wanted to know, okay, well, what's causing the C-PTSD? Was it just the early childhood abuse, or was it the narcissistic abuse? So we did a statistical analysis called a multiple regression analysis, and we determined that it was both. C-PTSD would be present statistically with just the childhood trauma, but as well as the narcissistic abuse. So it wasn't one or the other, it was both. And so we couldn't explain it away. The narcissistic abuse was damaging, and so was the early life trauma.
So did your study show correlation between people that had early childhood trauma and people that would accept the narcissistic abuse? And accept isn't a good word. So people that underwent, trauma early on were more likely to say, I guess this is okay. I guess this is what love feels like. I guess this is what relationships feel like.
Yeah. And here's the difference between kind of getting your information off the internet and working with a trauma specialist. Okay. What we know, largely from The Body Keeps the Score and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work, is that survivors of trauma carry a different physiology in their body after trauma occurs. So trauma reenactment theory, which is van der Kolk's theory, maintains that this subconscious attraction to familiar trauma, whether experienced as a child or adult or both, it's repeated on behavioral, emotional, physiological, and neuroendocrine levels. So this isn't just something that you choose. This is really something that is in your nervous system. So it's almost, and for many people, there might be a fleeting awareness of it, but it is so much deeper than that, which is why a really high level of intervention is needed to kind of interrupt these cycles. So there's a lot of, just like with regular domestic violence, there's just a lot of victim blaming involved in that, right?
For sure.
There's almost there's this trauma bonding that happens, and that looks a lot like kind of an addiction to this type of relationship. And I guess on one level that's true, but it's not something that she is choosing. It is it's repetition compulsion of trauma.
Wow, mind blowing. And how does one get diagnosed? You mentioned that it's often missed in the clinical community. How does one get diagnosed with C-PTSD?
So you would go to a therapist and you would work with them, and there is clinical criteria for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. How we measured it in my study was the complex trauma inventory, which is a new measure. And what it does is it measures all of the criteria for regular PTSD plus emotion dysregulation. And it adds those two scores together to get a complex trauma measure. So you could take a measure like that to get some sort of idea if you had that. But also working with a clinician, a really trained, skilled trauma therapist, they could render a diagnosis.
That's great. So, okay. So there's some sort and I know if you're listening and if this is resonant to you, you might be thinking, oh my God, my therapist has never said this. What do I need to do? And this is why I'm probing for this a little bit. And if you find yourself in that situation, then what Dr. Roberts is referring to is finding somebody who is trained in a specific way that is a trauma therapist. Is that right?
Yes. So, and there's very few clinicians really working in this space, this overlap of narcissistic abuse, or we could even call it the coercive control component of domestic violence. So there aren't many of us out there, but I'm finding anyone who's really skilled in trauma therapy. So, an EMDR therapist, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapist, or someone who says that they do IFS therapy or attachment work. These are the things that you want to listen for or read when you're looking for someone. So Another one, somatic experiencing. If a therapist knows that kind of modality, chances are good that he or she is going to kind of be skilled enough in this area to get you where you need to go.
Wow. And it sounds like people can heal from this and cope as much as one can with the hands that have been dealt to them. But it sounds like there's some really exciting things that can be done to make life better.
Yes, I would say that's very, very true. Something I want to just say, there's so much out there right now about narcissism and narcissistic abuse, and is it really as pervasive as it seems? And I mean, statistically, I would say yes. I mean, we've got studies out now, meta-analysis that shows that American college students today are 40% less empathetic than students 30 years ago. With the numbers primarily dropping after 2000. More specifically, today's students scored 48% lower in empathetic concern and 34% lower in perspective taking, both of which are really important indices of empathy, right? So other studies have documented increasing narcissism among college students since the late 80s. So a recent meta-analysis, which kind of takes into account all studies that have been done, found that when we were in college, 70% of people had normal to high, levels of empathy, and 30% had, lower to depressed levels of empathy. Just take a guess what it is now.
For lowered, maybe half of people have reduced empathy or lowered empathy.
It's flipped.
Oh, so it's 70-30 the other way now. 30% of people have normal levels of empathy and 70% don't. They're more indifferent.
Yes. So there's something here, right? Wow. That is going to play out in relationship. We also are seeing it play out in broader culture. We're seeing that. But then there's also something to this early life trauma component as well, right? So someone who's coming into relationship, and whether with a significant amount of early life trauma, if she gets with somebody who has really depleted empathy or high levels of narcissism, that's going to be especially damaging. She's going to be especially vulnerable and really not as prone as other people to get herself out of that situation. At the same time, she is going to be pretty harmed by a jerk too, right? So at some point, it doesn't totally matter what she's bringing to the table. It's something that is an entity unto itself that needs to be addressed for her happy relating. Why do I say that? Because so much of what's out there is erase the narcissist and you're going to be fine. That's right. That's not really true. What's most likely to happen is that you're likely to stay in this kind of subconscious trauma cycle. And not really ever get to your full embodied, alive self. And I think the gift in this dynamic and in this conversation is that often these narcissistic relationships are so bad that they push us into kind of our dark night of the soul. And that forces us to do the work that we might not have otherwise ever done. And I see that with so many of my clients. So,
Michelle, I see this with our clients as well when they have this kind of repetitive history, right? And we'll tell them, and we take them through our exercises, like who is your elevator person? Who's your high GHQ guy? Here are your red flags. Okay. And now you're ready to launch. And what we often find is when women, and frankly, men, right? When we come into the dating space, but we have these prior traumas that when we're presented with a good, solid human being that maybe has secure attachment, right? Mm-hmm. What do we hear from these clients?
He's boring.
He's boring. Like, I'm just bored. I need someone a little more exciting, a little more edgy. And I tell them, you're looking for somebody to activate your nervous system, to put you on edge, to make you feel like you're walking on eggshells, because we've come to mistake excitement and dysfunction.
Exactly. And that's why I always say it's actually a pretty dangerous time to start dating again if you really want a healthy partner, until you are really sure that you have done this work. Because even if you have, left your most recent narcissistic partner, if you go into the dating pool and you've got, Bela around you with the bumper pads, and you're only getting the good guys in there, that it could cause a relapse, because this fear that there's not going to be that jolt of, electricity could often drives women in this dynamic back. And I bet you see that too. I see that all the time in my practice.
We do. And we highlight it pretty quickly. Like, hey, I think this is pattern. This person, if they're not narcissistic, maybe they're avoidant. We call, people that are more avoidant, like they're broken koala bears, right? They want to attach, but their legs are broken and they can't. So while they can be good human beings and good friends and good sons and daughters and parents in romantic relationships, a different side emerges, and we take that early childhood trauma, and it can be and it transfers into our romantic relationships. So there are signs are often missed in the beginning. And that's what we've become really good at helping people identify, because there are clues, and the clues are there if you're looking for them. And the clues are also there if you might be avoidant and you might be wanting somebody who's more dysfunctional and exciting and, oh, this is boring. And so these are things that we work with people on a daily basis, because sometimes it's kind of, to your point, we go back to what's familiar. We may reenact things. Sometimes what we know intellectually to be right isn't what feels good or feels comfortable. So we regress to that. It's like, we all know how, intellectually, if I said, how can I lose 10 pounds? I would say, okay, eat less, move more, right? But how hard is that to do? Everything is in the execution. And that's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah. So it's just like you said, fear can sometimes be mistaken for excitement in intimate relationships. And unfortunately, this high state of anxiety can become the glue that binds people together in unhealthy bonds. And the absence of it can feel boring or empty. I call this phase living gray. He's gone. I'm supposed to be happy, but now I'm empty because my nervous system isn't constantly being activated, as it has probably been since I was a tiny girl, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, it feels like we're never going to experience aliveness again. We're alive, but we don't feel alive. That's what trauma really feels like.
Wow.
And so dating again too soon creates a huge relapse risk where trauma bonds are present.
And not only dating too soon, you might wait 10 years, but if you haven't done the work to heal that, right, is what you're saying with the EMDR, and did you call it IFS, and somatic therapy and attachment work, right? And do that, and then get yourself a friendly neighborhood dating coach that's going to wrap you in bubble wrap and pink sparkles and make sure that you stay the F away from narcissistic abuse. So there's a whole thing. And if you're listening to this and it feels like you, what I want you to know is this is not your fault.
Mm-mm.
It's not your fault, right?
Oh, and this is not even, this is not even a rare problem.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, very few of us get out of our childhoods without some sort of just some sort of trauma. And that's not to say that everyone has this problem, but it is not a rare problem either. That's why we're seeing so much of it. And like I said earlier, there is some sort of cultural shift here. And I could speculate on, reasons why social media is likely playing a role on.
Totally. I've got a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I can tell you, COVID certainly did a number on kids, and the time that they spend on social media platforms, looking at bikini photos of other people and I don't look good enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not pretty enough. Look at how ripped that guy is. I need to work out more. I need to take creatine. I live with this, right? I've got, and I see, and I can see where this could lead to a flip, to a reduction in empathy, to a spotlight on yourself, to a spotlight on your flaws, your perceived flaws, which leads to depression. It's like, God, can we throw our phones away? Let's go back to the clam phone. So, some days I think to myself, in 10 or 20 years, we're going to look at cell phone, or we're going to look at social media the way we look at smoking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so.
I do really too. And doing the work you do and doing the work that I do, I think we're very aligned in all of this. So, you mentioned that there's this pervasiveness, and we just speculated the why about narcissism and narcissistic abuse. And is it as pervasive? Sounds like hell to the yeah, it's as pervasive as it seems. Is that a fair statement?
I think that it is. I also think that not everything that's happening here is about that narcissists are horrible people. I think that this is a dance of trauma and that in a lot of ways, I mean, the same trauma that is creating a repetition compulsion on the part of the partners that we're talking about also plays a role in kind of the narcissistic defense, right? Or the avoidant defense. There's different types of trauma response: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Each of those types creates different patterns of behavior. Fight is, fight to stay safe. Flight is run away to stay safe, or keep, they tend to keep busy all the time. Freeze are the dissociators: check out, disconnect. And the fawns are the ones take care of everything, make sure everyone is okay. So but at the core of all of that, you don't get a trauma response without something, happening in the beginning. And so what's creating all of this, it's likely originating from a lot of the same sourcing. And I know for a lot of my clients, they really struggle with what is really pushed, I think, on social media. And that is this idea that narcissists are evil. And I mean, certainly a lack of empathy is not something that you want to run up against. It's not something that I'm ever going to condone or defend. But hurt people.
That's right.
And you can understand that 24 hours a day. But unless you decide to do your own healing work, you're likely not going to ever really fully escape that pattern, because you're part of that. You had Rachel Graham on your show recently, and I was really loving what she was talking about with self-responsibility. This is not victim blaming. I always tell my clients, this is not your fault what happened to you when you were a kid or when you were in that relationship. Not your fault. You didn't ask for it. You didn't deserve any of it.
None of it.
And it is totally your responsibility to clean it up. Because no one else is going to do that for you.
No.
So you can stay in this identity of a victim of what has happened to you.
Yeah.
Or you can go and do the healing work and step outside of it.
That's right.
And let me tell you, I wallowed in that identity myself personally for a good long while.
Wow.
So it is not something that I am trying to be judgmental about. It's an easy thing to do, but you really can get stuck in that identity. And that identity does serve you for a while. It helps you make sense of what's happened and what you're understanding. But you cannot stay there forever and have what my goal for myself and my clients is, and that's post-traumatic growth.
That's right.
That is what you get when you're willing to take a look at all of the dark stuff, sit in it, process it, feel the pain, instead of shopping it away or smoking it away or drinking it away or relationshiping it away, sitting in it, feeling it, and then turning self-parenting, taking care of yourself, doing things in a new way. When you do that, you come out on the other side a completely different person, really the you I think you were always supposed to be.
That's right.
That's the gift of it, if you choose to take it.
100%. And, one of the things I really believe in life is if you can find the meaning in the mess around you, right? You can shift. And like we were talking about in that previous episode, you go from victim and fine, wallow, like you're saying, in being a victim, but then you become the creator. You become the creator and you go into this empowered dynamic, like, okay, that sucked. And that was horrible. But now how do I get out of that? I've sat with it. Then you go and work with Dr. Roberts and you get all of the therapy and you get the EMDR and you do the coaching and you heal yourself. And then you get assistance around dating so that somebody's whispering in your ear and looking in your inbox and listening to what the dates are looking like and feeling like to tell you, no, that's not good for you, but this one is, right? And that's ultimately all of the resources that now exist out there didn't exist 30 years ago, right? We didn't even know these things. And so now if this feels like, oh my God, this is touching a nerve, the good news is that there's a lot of help out there and there are people that can help you and there are people that can understand you and get you to a better place. So be inspired to take that first step, take that action to getting yourself the guardrails around you, right? If you were going to jump out of an airplane, if you were like, I'm going to go skydiving, right? That's let's say that's dating for a lot of you that have had trauma in the past. Nobody's going to let you get up in a plane and go jump out of the plane alone. You know what they're going to do is they're going to put you through a 4-hour, learning thing and videos. And then they're going to strap a skydiving instructor to you before you jump out of that plane. Ain't nobody going to let you jump out by yourself, even if you're like, I got this. No, you don't. you don't have this. You want someone strapped to you that has another chute, because what if your chute doesn't open? So that's the same thing in this process. And so many of us have traumas. I know we follow Dr. Amir Levine's work as well, who wrote the book Attached. And he says, if you add it up, 25% of people are reported to be emotionally avoidant, 20% are anxious and attachment style, and 5% are anxious avoidant. Guys, that's 1 in 2. Okay. Right? 1 in 2. Okay. Mm-hmm. And now Michelle's saying that 70% has flipped to the other side of people with reduced empathy. You got to have some new skills when you get out there. And the good news is we're really here to help you to do that. And if this sounds like you, feels like you, know, you're just like, at minimum, at least half of the people on planet Earth, if not more at this point. And Michelle, what are the 5 best pieces of advice that you can give to survivors? I just love that. And you've given so many great pieces of advice, but do you have 5 more that you could just, blow our minds with, or however many you have?
Well, anyone who's been through a trauma bond, or an addiction, we play these games with ourselves. We gaslight ourselves. To stay safe, we convince ourselves that it's not that bad.
Right.
My first piece of advice is make a commitment to live in reality. If you find yourself wanting to fantasize about what could be or what you hope will be, remind yourself that you've made a commitment to live in the truth. Even if you don't choose to leave the relationship immediately, in the meantime, you can at least remind yourself that you will have to stop fantasizing about what isn't there. When we're little kids and our parents are not there for us, we have no choice but to fantasize it there. That is how we survive our childhoods. We do that when we're adults too, and we create these fantasy bonds. And we can live in those bonds with partners that are not there for us for a long time. So make a commitment to live in reality. Understand the hook. Identify what exactly you're losing. It might be a fantasy, a dream, an illusion. Maybe your partner convinced you into believing they were going to fulfill some deep unmet need in you. Once you can identify what that need or hook is, you can get down to the business of grieving it. Grieving means holding your hands open and letting it go. You say goodbye to the notion that the need you have may never be met. At a minimum, it will not be met by this relationship.
And when you say understand the hook, it means understand what this person was giving you, what need they were fulfilling, what hooked you in, or what hooked you. And then understand that was an illusion. It's not reality. They cannot provide that need for you, and grieve it. Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that.
Often this illusion of connection and bonding, even though we know it's not there, if we have kind of just the trappings of the relationship, even though he's not coming home or doing all of these things, narcissist or not, right? If it's not fulfilling, if it has this kind of a facade to it, it just fills this fantasy need. And for people with trauma, sometimes we can live there for a very long time. Okay.
Wow.
And then because our nervous systems are, so disassociated as well, we're never really being embodied or in the moment. So that's a really important thing. Another one is write a bottom line, list of bottom line behaviors for yourself, some possibilities. I will not sleep with someone who calls me names. I will not argue with someone who has been drinking. I will take care of my own finances. I will not have conversations with anyone when I feel desperate or defensive or obsessive. whatever your areas of concern, just determine what you need to do to change and make those your bottom line behaviors. I bet you could help someone come up with a list of those too, Bella.
Oh, I love them.
Build your own sweet life. This was the best part of my own recovery, and it involved rescuing a couple retired greyhounds, something I never thought I would do. There's a whole story about that. But just little by little, start dreaming about your future for yourself and your children, if you have them. In other words, make dreams that don't involve this person. Maybe you want to go to school. That's what I did. Start a hobby, go to church, join a club. Just start making some life-affirming choices for yourself that take you away from these toxic interactions that have been destroying your peace of mind. And then finally, and this is so important, not being with this person does not mean isolate yourself. It doesn't mean stop relating. The only way to be really free from unhealthy connections is to start investing in healthy ones. And they do not have to be romantic. Develop other close, connected, and bonded relationships that are not centered on drama. Make these your go-to people, your family of choice. It's really hard to heal without support. So notice the people in your life who show you loving concern. And I have some clients who have had this accumulation of trauma over their life, and they really struggle to find a group like that. Get a good therapist to start. Therapists, helpers that you turn to, and you hire to help you. They count. My therapist, she counts.
Totally.
She was ground zero.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Literally, I'm taking notes because your tips are so amazing. So amazing. I'm so grateful for you and for the work that you're doing. You're doing God's work and bringing this, to mainstream society. And I, am just delighted and honored that you would share your gems with us, and we will definitely have you back. And for those of you who are listening, Dr. Roberts does coaching groups. And do you want to tell us just a quick thing about what you're doing and what you're starting?
Oh yeah, I'm in private practice, and I see a small number of clients for intensive work, and I open those up a couple times a year. And so get on my mailing list, and I will let you know when I open those up. And then I'm doing 2 groups this year. So I'm really excited about that. So I'll be there in person, and then we'll also kind of have this healing community of people working together. And I'm going to be starting those in June and the other one in the fall. So really looking forward to those. And if you want to look those up, it's www.michellerobertsphd.com.
Oh, you are the best. Thank you so much for joining us, and get your therapy, get your dating suit on, people, and then come to Smart Dating Academy, because between Dr. Roberts' work and our work, I promise you will find a healthy, cute, adorable lid to your gorgeous little pot.
I love that.